Welcome to Quantum Quill Story Editions. In this series, the world's greatest classics are reimagined through fully original adaptations designed for modern listening, crafted with cinematic pacing, immersive narration, and deep respect for the enduring spirit of the original works. Today's story is The Count of Monte Cristo, a tale of ambition, betrayal, imprisonment, and revenge. A young sailor stands on the edge of a brilliant future until envy destroys everything he loves. Buried alive within the walls of a forgotten prison, he loses his name, his freedom, and nearly his soul. But from the darkness emerges something far more powerful than the man who entered it. This is not an abridgment. It is a new telling. Faithful in spirit, original in expression. So settle in, dim the lights, and step into a world of hidden fortunes, dangerous secrets, and the long shadow of vengeance across the shores of France. This is The Count of Monte Cristo. Act 1. The harbour of Marseilles glittered beneath a hard blue morning, all masts, gulls, rope, and sun-struck water. When the Pharaon came slowly through the mouth of the port, men stopped bargaining, women shaded their eyes, and boys ran along the quay shouting that Morel's ship had returned. She was a handsome vessel, salt-white at the seams, weary but proud, her sails furled with unusual solemnity. At her rail stood Edmond Dantès. He was young enough to look made of promise and seasoned enough to command without raising his voice. The crew watched him with the quiet confidence men give only to one who has earned it in danger. Yet there was no triumph in his face. Monsieur Morel, the ship's owner, came out in a small boat, concern sharpening his features. "Dantès," he called, "why this morning?" Edmond removed his cap. "Captain Leclerc is dead, sir." The words fell across the water like a bell. Morel closed his eyes briefly. "And the cargo?" "Safe, every crate accounted for." "And the ship?" "Sound." Morel looked from the vessel to the young man who had brought her home. "Then you commanded her well." "I did my duty." Near the companionway, Danglars heard the exchange and lowered his eyes. He was the ship's purser, older than Edmond, clever in small ways, careful with figures, careless with loyalties. He had spent the voyage watching sailors obey a boy, and had smiled each time with his mouth alone. Morel climbed aboard. "There was a delay at Elba," Danglars said, almost gently. Edmond turned. "Captain Leclerc gave me a sealed packet to deliver there before he died." "To whom?" asked Morel. "To Marshal Bertrand." Morel's expression changed. In France, one name did not need to be spoken to cast a long shadow. "You understood the risk?" he asked. "No, sir. I carried out a dying man's command. Nothing more." Danglars looked away, but not before Edmond saw the flash of calculation in his eyes. Morel placed a hand on Edmond's shoulder. "Go home. See your father. See Mercedes. We will speak later of your future." "My future? If my partner agrees, the Pharaon will need a captain." For one suspended instant, the harbour vanished. Edmond saw only his father's small room, Mercedes' dark eyes, a life rising before him like land after a storm. "Sir," he said, voice unsteady, "I will be worthy of it." "I believe you already are." Edmond left the ship, almost running. His father lived high above a narrow street, in a room where poverty had been swept clean but not defeated. The old man was tying a thin vine to a wooden frame when Edmond entered. "Father," the old man turned, stared, and then folded into his son's arms. "My boy," he whispered. "My Edmond." Edmond held him tightly, feeling how light he had become. "You have eaten badly," he said. "I have eaten enough." Edmond opened the cupboard. It was empty. A silence passed between them. "Caderousse came for the debt," the old man admitted. "I paid it. I would not have your name spoken poorly while you were at sea." Edmond took out the coins from his wages and laid them on the table. "No more of this. You will have wine today, bread today, meat today. Soon you will have a house with a garden. I may be captain." The old man trembled. "Captain? If Morel keeps his word, heaven has remembered us." At the door, a shadow appeared. Caderousse, the tailor, stepped in with his broad grin and restless eyes. "Edmond, back from the Dead Seas." "Back from honest work," Edmond said. Caderousse glanced at the coins and then at the old man, then smiled wider. "And soon to be captain, they say. They say many things." "And soon to marry Mercedes?" At her name, Edmond's guard fell. "Soon." "Then hurry, beautiful women are seldom left unwatched." Edmond's smile faded, but only for a moment. He kissed his father's brow. "I will return before evening." He found Mercedes in the Catalan quarter, where the houses leaned toward the sea and the air smelled of salt, fish, and sun-warmed stone. She stood in the doorway of her small dwelling, listening to Fernand Mondego with the weary patience of one refusing pain she had never invited. Fernand was her cousin, dark, strong, and fevered by longing. He loved her as some men love possession, not by seeing, but by claiming. "I would give you my life," he said. "I did not ask for it." "You would choose a sailor who may vanish with the next storm." "I have chosen Edmond." "And if he never returns?" A voice answered from the lane. "Then I would be greatly disappointed." Mercedes turned. The world changed in her face. "Edmond!" She ran to him, and whatever restraint belonged to custom or caution burned away. He caught her in his arms. For a moment, there was no harbor, no empire, no envy, no danger, only two young hearts restored to their rightful rhythm. Fernand watched them as though he had been struck. Edmond saw him over Mercedes's shoulder. "Fernand," he said, extending his hand, "we are to be family then." Fernand looked at the hand. Mercedes looked at Fernand. At last, he took it. "Family," he said, the word tasting of blood. By afternoon, everyone seemed to know. Edmond Dantès had returned. Edmond Dantès would be captain. Edmond Dantès would marry Mercedes within days. At La Réserve, beneath the trees, Danglars sat with Caderousse and Fernand, watching the couple pass in the distance. "They look happy," Caderousse said, already drunk enough to enjoy another man's wound. Fernand said nothing. Danglars poured wine. "Happiness," he observed, "is often a temporary arrangement." Caderousse laughed. "You speak like a priest at a funeral." "I speak like a man who understands paperwork." Fernand lifted his head. Danglars let the silence ripen. A man need not be killed to be removed, he said softly. Sometimes he need only be accused. Of what? Fernand asked. Danglars shrugged. In these times, loyalty to the wrong master. A letter carried from Elba. A message intended for Paris. Authorities are hungry for treason. Caderousse frowned. Dantès is no traitor. No, Danglars said. Of course not. But he pulled paper toward him. Fernand watched his hand. What are you writing? Nothing, a fantasy. An anonymous warning from a loyal citizen. The authorities may ignore it. He dipped the pen. Caderousse tried to stand. This is wickedness. Danglars pushed wine toward him. Then forget you saw it. Fernand did not move. The pen scratched. By dusk, Edmond sat beside Mercédès at his betrothal feast, his father nearby, Morel smiling, the room alive with music and clinking glasses. Even Fernand had come, pale and silent at the edge of the celebration. Danglars was courteous. Caderousse was loud. Mercédès wore no jewels, but happiness made her luminous. Edmond rose. My friends, he began, I have little to give tonight but gratitude. To my father, who waited, to Monsieur Morel, who trusted me, to Mercédès, who... A knock struck the door. The music faltered. 3 officers entered. Edmond Dantès? Edmond turned, still smiling faintly, as if the name could only bring some harmless formality. I am he. You are under arrest? Mercédès stood. For what? The officer did not look at her. Conspiracy against the crown. A sound moved through the room. Not a cry, not yet, but the breath before one. Edmond stared in disbelief. There is a mistake. Then you will explain it. Morel stepped forward. This man is one of mine. Then you may petition for him tomorrow. Mercédès seized Edmond's arm. Tell them. He looked at her, and now fear entered him. Not for himself, but because her hand was shaking. I carried a packet, he said. I did not know. Come. His father rose, then swayed. Edmond. I will return, Edmond said quickly. This is nothing. A question. A misunderstanding. But as the officers led him out, he saw Danglars lower his eyes, Caderousse bury his face in his cup, and Fernand standing motionless as stone. Outside, the harbour bells rang the hour. Edmond looked back once. Mercédès stood in the doorway, white as sea foam, one hand pressed to her heart. I will return, he called. The night took him. Act 2. The cell smelled of whetstone, rust, and forgotten years. At first, Edmond Dantès counted the days by the passage of light beneath the door. Then, by meals. Then, by the changing ache in his bones. Eventually, time loosened and drifted away from him altogether. He had entered the Château d'If, believing in justice. He remained there long enough to understand power instead. The interrogating magistrate in Marseilles had been young, polished, courteous even. Gérard de Villefort had listened carefully, while Edmond explained the packet from Elba, the dying captain's request. The sealed letter meant for Paris. At the mention of the name written upon that letter, however, something had changed in him. Not visibly, only a tightening around the mouth, a flicker in the eyes. Where is the letter now? Villefort had asked quietly. I gave it to you. Yes. Edmond leaned forward hopefully. Then you know I am innocent. Villefort had stared at him for a long moment. Young man, he finally said, there are times when innocence itself becomes dangerous. Edmond did not understand. He understood even less when the letter disappeared into the fire moments later. You will be released, he asked. Perhaps. Instead, armed men had escorted him across black water to the island prison. No trial, no sentence, only disappearance. At first, he raged. He shouted until his throat bled, demanded audiences, demanded law, demanded Morel, demanded Mercedes, demanded the right to defend himself. The guards laughed. One of them finally crouched outside the bars and said almost kindly, "No one remembers men who come here." After that, Edmond stopped shouting. Years passed like water dripping through cracks in stone. His father died alone in Marseilles. Mercedes waited until waiting itself became a wound too large to carry. Morel fought for Edmond's release until creditors began circling his company like gulls over a dying ship. None of this Edmond knew. In darkness, the mind feeds itself with memory until memory becomes torment. He remembered Mercedes's voice most vividly. Sometimes he woke convinced. He had heard her whisper his name beyond the wall. Sometimes he dreamed of sunlight on the harbor and awoke with tears already on his face. The prison slowly stripped him of youth. Then, one winter night, he heard scratching. Not rats, metal against stone. Edmond sat upright. Again, scrape, pause, scrape. For the first time in years, his pulse quickened with something other than despair. He pressed his ear to the wall. The sound came from below and slightly to the right. Someone was digging. For weeks, he listened. The sound became rhythm, purpose, proof that another living soul existed within the tomb of the fortress. Then one night, a section of stone shifted inward. A hand emerged through darkness, old, thin, trembling. Edmond stared in disbelief. An eye appeared next, bright with intelligence. "You are not the jailer," the stranger whispered. "No." "Excellent. Then I have made a mistake." The absurdity of the statement nearly made Edmond laugh for the first time in years. The old man squeezed through the opening and collapsed breathlessly onto the floor. He was small, gray-haired, and ragged, but his gaze possessed astonishing force. "I intended to tunnel into the outer wall," he muttered. "Instead, I have found a neighbor." "Who are you?" "A priest, a scholar, a prisoner. At present, a very tired old man." He extended a hand. "Abbé Faria." "Edmond Dantès." The abbé smiled faintly. "You still introduce yourself like a free man." That night altered everything. Faria became teacher, physician, philosopher, and father in the space where Edmond's hope had died. Through the hidden tunnel between their cells, the old man carried fragments of another world. Languages, history, science, politics, the invisible machinery of power. "You are not imprisoned because you are guilty," Faria said one evening while sketching maps into dust with a spoon handle. "You are imprisoned because you were inconvenient." Edmond sat very still. "Tell me everything again," the abbé said. Edmond repeated the story carefully. The voyage, the packet, the letter, the arrest. Faria interrupted constantly. "What was the magistrate's name?" "Villefort." "And the letter's recipient?" Edmond hesitated. "A man named Noirtier." Faria froze. "Ah, you know the name?" "I know enough." The old priest leaned back slowly. "Your magistrate destroyed you to protect himself." Edmond stared. "No. Yes." "He seemed honorable." Faria laughed softly. "My poor Edmond, the world's most dangerous men often do." Step by step, with relentless precision, the abbé assembled the conspiracy. Danglars envied Edmond's rise. Fernand desired Mercedes. Villefort feared the political ruin hidden inside the letter Edmond unknowingly carried. "And Caderousse?" Edmond asked bitterly. Faria was silent a moment. "There are men," he said at last, "whose weakness is as destructive as another man's cruelty." The truth struck harder than imprisonment had. Not strangers, not fate. Men he had trusted. For days, Edmond could barely speak. Then something colder than grief entered him. Purpose. "I will make them pay," he said quietly. Faria looked at him across the darkness. "Careful. Hatred is a prison more durable than stone." "They buried me alive." "Yes, and if vengeance becomes your soul, they will still own your life." Edmond lowered his eyes. But inwardly, another self had already begun to form. Years continued passing, though differently now. The prison no longer devoured him hour by hour. He studied, learned discipline, learned patience, learned concealment. Faria transformed him with relentless rigor. "You have passion," the abbé said, "useful in youth, fatal in strategy." He taught Edmond to observe before speaking, to read men by hesitation and vanity, to think several moves beyond emotion. "You were a sailor," Faria told him. "You must become something far more dangerous." "What?" "A man impossible to predict." One night, after a violent seizure left the old priest weak and pale, Faria revealed his final secret. "There is treasure." Edmond almost smiled. "You have been imprisoned too long." "I was imprisoned because of it." Faria described an island in the Mediterranean. Monte Cristo. A hidden cavern. Gold, jewels, bonds, enough wealth to alter kingdoms. Edmond listened skeptically at first. Then Faria recited measurements, pathways, landmarks, mechanisms, all with mathematical exactness. "This fortune belonged to the Spada family," he whispered. "I alone uncovered its location. And you would share it." The old priest looked at him affectionately. "My son, what use has a dying man for riches?" Edmond gripped his hand. "Do not speak of dying." But death had already entered the cell. Faria suffered another seizure days later, more violent than the last. Edmond dragged him onto the bed, desperate, helpless. "Listen to me," the abbé gasped. "If you escape, we escape." "No." A faint smile crossed the old man's face. "You still speak like a good man." Edmond felt terror rising inside him. "You cannot leave me here." I already left long ago. His breathing weakened. Do not waste your life in bitterness, Faria whispered. Become greater than those who harmed you. Then, after a long, final exhale, he lay still. Edmond remained beside the body until morning. Something inside him broke completely then. Not loudly, not visibly, but permanently. When the jailers came for the corpse, Edmond watched them sew the old priest into burial cloth with rough indifference. The Château d'If buried its dead at sea. That night, in silence, Edmond acted. He carried Faria's body through the tunnel into his own cell. Then he took the dead man's place inside the burial sack. The coarse fabric closed around him. Needles pierced near his face as the sack was stitched shut. Every instinct screamed for movement. He did not move. He was lifted, carried. Footsteps echoed through corridors. Cold air struck the sack. Voices above him. One more for the sea. A weight was tied to his feet. Panic exploded inside him. Then, motion. A violent plunge downward. The Mediterranean swallowed him whole. The icy shock nearly tore consciousness away. Bound inside darkness, Edmond twisted desperately. The weight dragged him deeper. Stone, pressure, silence. With frantic effort, he worked one hand free, then another. He tore at the cloth, burst into black water, and saw the chain pulling him toward the abyss. He cut himself loose with the knife stolen from the abbé's cell. Then he kicked upward with everything left in him. At last, he broke the surface beneath a storm-torn sky. Rain lashed his face. The prison rose behind him like a black fang against the horizon. Edmond floated there gasping, staring at the fortress that had consumed 14 years of his life. Then thunder rolled across the sea, and Edmond Dantès disappeared into the night. Act 3. The first thing Edmond Dantès learned about freedom was that it did not feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion. For days after escaping the Château d'If, he drifted among smugglers and sailors beneath false names, speaking little, watching everything. The sea that had once promised adventure now seemed ancient and indifferent. He carried the memory of the prison in his posture, in the silence between his words, in the instinctive suspicion that followed every kindness. But one thought burned steadily beneath all others. Monte Cristo. At last, beneath the disguise of a rough seaman and under cover of a supply errand, Edmond secured passage to the barren island Faria had described. It rose from the Mediterranean, like the spine of some drowned beast, jagged rock, thorned brush, caves carved by centuries of wind and tide. The smugglers laughed when Edmond insisted on exploring alone. Nothing lives there, one warned. Perhaps, Edmond replied quietly, something waits. He climbed for hours beneath a punishing sun, following the abbé's instructions from memory. A split stone shaped like a bishop's mitre. 3 narrow ledges above the eastern inlet. A hidden crevice concealed by hanging brush. At last, he found the cavern. His pulse thundered. Inside, darkness folded around him like velvet. He carried a torch deeper and deeper through the narrow passage until it widened into a chamber. There, beneath centuries of dust, stood iron-bound chests. Edmond did not breathe. He opened the first chest with trembling hands. Gold. Not coins alone, but bars, chains, goblets, jeweled crucifixes, diamonds wrapped in decayed velvet, pearls pale as moonlight. The torchlight fractured into 1,000 fires. For a long moment, he simply stared. The prison had stripped him of identity, youth, hope, and name. Now fate returned to him something far more dangerous than freedom, power. When he finally laughed, the sound startled even him. It echoed through the cavern like the voice of a stranger. Months later, Paris began whispering about a mysterious nobleman of impossible wealth. The Count of Monte Cristo arrived not as a man entering society, but as a force entering orbit. His houses were lavish, yet austere. His servants silent and fiercely loyal. His knowledge unsettlingly precise. Bankers competed for his favor. Politicians sought his attention. Aristocrats feared offending him without understanding why. No one connected the Count with Edmond Dantès. Edmond had buried that sailor in the sea. Now he wore elegance like armor. He moved through drawing rooms beneath chandeliers and watched his enemies age beneath the weight of their own sins. Danglars had become a wealthy banker, vulgar beneath refinement, still ruled by greed. Fernand Mondego had reinvented himself as a decorated count and military hero, though beneath his honors lay betrayal and blood. Villefort had risen high within the machinery of justice, respected, severe, untouchable. And Mercedes had become Fernand's wife. That knowledge wounded Edmond more deeply than prison ever had. Yet when he finally saw her again across a Paris salon, he also saw sorrow, lingering quietly behind her beauty, like candlelight beneath mourning cloth. She recognized him immediately, not his face, his eyes. No prison, title, or fortune could disguise those. "You are not who you pretend to be," she whispered when they finally stood alone. Edmond regarded her calmly. "Most people are not." Her voice trembled. Edmond. The name passed through him like a blade. For one dangerous instant, the Count vanished, and the young sailor returned. Then the mask settled once more. "That man died long ago, madame." But Mercedes knew otherwise, and because she knew, she feared what he intended. The Count's revenge began almost invisibly. A rumor placed carefully, a debt called unexpectedly, a truth exposed at precisely the right moment. He did not strike his enemies with rage. Rage was crude, temporary. He dismantled them with patience. Danglars lost fortunes through manipulations so subtle he never understood he was being guided toward ruin. Investments collapsed. Confidence evaporated. Men he once mocked abandoned him one by one. Fernand's destruction came through truth. The Count arranged for evidence of Fernand's wartime betrayals to surface publicly. Villages sold to slaughter, allies sacrificed for advancement, innocent blood traded for titles. Paris society recoiled instantly. Honor, once cracked, shattered quickly among the powerful. Fernand returned home, wild-eyed and desperate. Mercedes stood waiting for him in silence. "You knew," she said. "I did what was necessary. You built our life on corpses." He seized her arms. I did it for us? No, she replied softly. You did it for yourself. Then she looked toward the door. You always feared Edmond Dantès. Now you understand why. Fernand turned. The Count stood there. No servants, no audience, no disguise left between them. Recognition passed across Fernand's face like death itself. You. Yes. Fernand staggered backward. I thought you were dead. You hoped so. Shame, fear, and hatred twisted together inside Fernand until only violence remained. Then kill me, he spat. Is that not why you came? Edmond looked at him for a long moment. Once, years ago, he would have done exactly that. But now he saw something pitiful beneath the ruin. A man destroyed long before this night by his own envy. You condemned yourself, Edmond said quietly. Fernand reached for a pistol. Before dawn, he was dead by his own hand. Yet vengeance brought Edmond no peace. That realization unsettled him more than hatred ever had. Meanwhile, Villefort's downfall unfolded with terrible precision. The Count exposed secret crimes buried beneath the magistrate's polished reputation. Corruption, concealed scandals, innocent lives sacrificed to ambition. Worse still, the poison already hidden within Villefort's own household began consuming his family from within. Death entered room after room. Suspicion became madness. By the time Villefort understood the architecture of the revenge surrounding him, his mind had begun to collapse beneath grief and guilt. You, he cried during their final confrontation, all this because of one imprisonment. One imprisonment? Edmond repeated softly. The words chilled the room. You stole 14 years from me. My father died starving. My bride buried me while I still breathed. You condemned me without trial because my life inconvenienced yours. Villefort fell to his knees. I was afraid, and so was I. The magistrate wept openly now. Edmond looked at him without triumph, only weariness. When he left, Villefort remained alone among the ruins of his own making, muttering to ghosts no one else could see. At last, only Danglars remained. The banker fled Paris with what fortune he could salvage, clutching jewels and bonds like a drowning man clutching stones. But the Count's reach extended farther than money. Bandits intercepted Danglars during his escape. Days later, exhausted, filthy, and half-starved, the once powerful banker found himself seated before the Count in a dimly lit chamber. Recognition drained the blood from his face. Mercy, Danglars whispered. Years earlier, Edmond would have savored the plea. Now he only studied the man. This trembling creature had helped destroy a life out of jealousy over a promotion and a woman that were never his. So much suffering, born from something so small. You feared my success, Edmond said quietly. Danglars sobbed. Forgive me. The room fell silent. At length, Edmond rose. I have been imprisoned too long, he said. Danglars stared upward uncertainly. You are free. The banker blinked in disbelief. Why? Edmond looked toward the distant horizon beyond the window. Because if I continue, I become no better than the men I hated. And for the first time in many years, he understood the abbé's warning completely. Vengeance could destroy enemies, but only mercy could end vengeance itself. Soon afterward, Edmond prepared to leave France. The Count of Monte Cristo had become legend, rumor, fear. But beneath the titles and wealth, Edmond felt strangely hollow, as though revenge had consumed the very life it promised to restore. Before departing, Mercedes came to see him one final time. Age and sorrow had gentled her beauty into something deeper. "You are leaving forever," she said. "Yes." "Do you still love me?" Edmond closed his eyes briefly. With the part of me that survived, tears filled hers. "We were both buried by what happened." "Yes." She stepped closer. "And now?" He looked out toward the sea, beyond the garden terraces. "Now I must learn how to live as something other than a ghost." They embraced once, not as lovers reunited, but as two souls mourning the lives stolen from them. Then she let him go. At dawn, his ship departed quietly, beneath pale gold light. Beside him stood Heyday, loyal and watchful, carrying the possibility of a future untouched by prisons and graves. The coastline of France slowly faded behind them. Edmond remained at the rail long after it vanished. The sea wind moved through his dark hair, much as it had when he was a young sailor entering Marseilles full of hope. Yet he was no longer that man. He had crossed through betrayal, despair, hatred, wealth, power, and revenge, and emerged altered beyond recognition. Still, somewhere beyond the horizon, life remained. Not the life stolen from him, something new. And as the sun rose over the endless water, Edmond Dantès finally understood that justice and vengeance were not the same thing, and that the heart survives not by clinging to suffering, but by daring, after everything, to begin again. As the sea carries Edmond Dantès toward an uncertain horizon, one truth remains. Some betrayals destroy a life, others forge an entirely new one. The Count of Monte Cristo is ultimately a story about transformation, about what survives injustice, what revenge costs the soul, and whether mercy can arrive before bitterness consumes what remains of the human heart. Thank you for listening to this Quantum Quill Story Edition. If this reimagined adaptation moved you, the original unabridged masterpiece by Alexandre Dumas has also been carefully modernized and presented by Quantum Quill Publishing in two distinct formats: a complete modernized classic edition ebook and a 5-volume serialized edition preserving the structure and experience of Dumas' original publication. Both editions are available at Quantum Quill Publishing. Until next time, thank you for listening and for keeping the great classics alive for a new generation.